What's good? It's your boy 2K here. Shout out to the movement and everybody who's moving with us. If you haven't already checked out the website, go check out 3kingsboxing.com, man. A lot of good content over there. We really doing our thing. Check us out. For this one, I want to talk about the sudden retirement of Kronk Gym protege and Irish-born fighter Andy Lee. Now, we haven't heard much from Andy Lee. I mean, he recently chopped up some no-name, his first fight after losing his WBO title to Billy Joe Saunders. And he was in the media recently. He was supposed to fight, or at least he was in talks to fight Daniel Jacobs last month, right? But for whatever reason, those negotiations fell through. And I believe Andy Lee was actually looking for the big fights and couldn't get them. So he said, fuck it. I'm 33 years old. I'll go ahead and hang him up, right? In this one, I want to talk a little bit about Andy Lee's amateur pedigree and if he was able to properly transfer that into the professional ranks, right? A lot of cats don't understand. Andy Lee was a highly regarded amateur fighter. I mean, he fought and defeated cats like Alfredo Angulo, Marco Antonio Parabin, Darren Barker, right? Ismail Salak. Now, Ismail Salak was a guy who didn't do well as a professional fighter, but he was a highly regarded amateur, and Andy Lee was able to beat him, right? And then also he fought guys like Gennady Golovkin and Hassan N'Djamena in the amateurs as well. So he had been around the world and he had seen a lot of different styles, right? But what really got Andy Lee the opportunity to work with a guy like Emanuel Steward was when he defeated a highly regarded, actually a very highly regarded, very popular Emanuel Steward saw him as the best 152-pound fighter in America at that time, in Jesus Gonzalez. Now, this was at the World Junior Championships. I think Andy Lee was like 15, 16 years old, something like that, right? He defeated Jesus Gonzalez. And Emanuel Steward had heard that, you know, through the grapevine, like, yeah, this Irish kid named Andy Lee came over and beat Jesus Gonzalez. That's how popular this guy was. And Emanuel Steward was like, what? For real? And it was so astonishing to Emanuel Steward that he felt like he needed to offer Andy Lee a contract immediately. And he did so without even seeing the guy fight one time, right? Of course, Andy Lee said, yeah, shit, nigga, this is a contract, and motherfuckers don't even know who I am and what I've done. Absolutely. You know, I'm pretty sure Andy Lee knew who Emanuel Steward was, right? My man had an excellent resume, and he was a figure in boxing at that time, right? So, of course, Andy Lee takes the contract. He flies over to Detroit from Ireland. He lives with Emanuel Steward, actually, for some time, right? And when he gets off the plane, he immediately goes to Kronk Gym. And he tells Manny, he says, I want to fight. And Manny was like, nah, bro, you know what I'm saying? You probably got jet lag and shit. Sit your ass down, dog. Andy Lee was like, no, mate. You know what I'm saying? He was like, nah, I want to fight. You know what I'm saying? I want to get in the ring. I want to mix it up. You know what I'm saying? I want to get some work in. So, Emanuel Steward obliged. He said, okay, well, shit. Once you get in the ring with that killer over there, we call him K9. If y'all know who it is, that's Cornelius Bundridge. And at that time, Cornelius Bundridge was an undefeated fighter. When those two fought, they actually sparred. Emanuel Steward is quoted as saying, Andy Lee doggone went in there and whooped K9's ass, right? I'll say another quote, and this will support the fact that Emanuel Steward felt that he had a diamond in the rough, and it also supports as to why he signed Andy Lee without even watching him fight one time, right? He said that he has never rated any of his fighters higher than Andy Lee. That's a quote from Emanuel Steward, right? Y'all understand that Emanuel Steward trained guys like Gerald McClellan, right? Obakar, Mark Breland, you know, the great Tommy Hearns, right? The McCrory brothers, Milton and Steve, right? Steve was a highly decorated amateur, while Milton was the former welterweight champion, right? I think it was a title that was vacated by Pernell Whitaker. He picked that up, you know. Trained a lot of good fighters. And Emanuel Steward said he's never rated any of those guys higher than Andy Lee. That's high fucking marks, yo. You know what I'm saying? That is that's major regard. You know what I mean? So he really saw something in Andy Lee. And you can tell that he wanted to savor what he had seen. And he really wanted to bring out the full potential of Andy Lee. Hence why Andy Lee didn't turn pro until he was 21 years old, right? Emanuel Steward was quoted as saying, I want this guy to understand the history of boxing. I want him to get well educated before we actually put him in the professional ranks, right? And that's what Emanuel Steward attempted to do. Now, this isn't the first time that this has happened, what I'm getting ready to say next. There's a lot of trainers out there that they see something in guys and they really believe that they can become something that they really possibly couldn't do. You know what I'm saying? Now, I will say this. Emanuel Steward was correct in saying that Andy Lee will one day be a world champion. He quoted that. He said that before, but the first time I actually heard him say it was shortly before he died, right? And of course, Andy Lee achieved that accomplishment after Emanuel Steward had already passed, when he defeated Matt Korobov. I believe it was by a 7th round knockout for the vacant WBO title that punk-ass Peter Quillen vacated because he was getting too much pressure to fight Gennady Golovkin, right? And that's facts, dog. Y'all can go back and look that shit up. But anyway, he got the title off of that. But I mean, the way I feel about vacant titles, and in my opinion, you know, Matt Korobov is another guy who is a highly decorated amateur. I believe Matt Korobov defeated Gennady Golovkin in the amateurs, if I'm not mistaken. And he was a highly decorated amateur. He fought everybody, fought all over the place, right? Beat a lot of cats. But as a professional, again, he cannot transfer that amateur pedigree into the professional ranks. We saw this shit a lot, man. David Reed, you know what I'm saying? Ali Harrison. There is a lot of amateur fighters that just could not transfer that amateur pedigree into the professional ranks. And in my opinion, Andy Lee was another one, right? For me, let me get some water real quick, y'all. Alright. For me, I knew about Andy Lee. You know what I'm saying? I followed Emanuel Steward because I thought he was one of the best trainers in boxing. So whenever he talked about fighters, I was like, okay, let me check that cat out. And I knew that he really liked Andy Lee. So I would watch Andy Lee. And me personally, at that time of watching Andy Lee early in his career, I wasn't the breakdown expert that I am today, right? I mean, shit, I'll give y'all a little gem. Something to laugh at in the middle of this video. I thought Jeff Left Hook Lacey was that nigga. You know what I'm saying? When he went over there to fight Joe Calzaghe, I was like, man, ain't nobody beating Left Hook. Ain't nobody beating Left Hook, man. You know what I'm saying? That's how, let me say that I hadn't evolved into what I am today to be able to break down styles in real time. You know what I'm saying? With precision. And I still didn't see anything, let me say, great in Andy Lee, right? And what really prompted me that Andy Lee is an overhyped fighter by Emanuel Steward was when he lost in 2008 by knockout to Brian Vera. Brian Vera, if you guys don't know, he's the same guy that fought Julio Cesar Chavez twice in San Antonio, I believe. I think he fought like Gabe Rosado or somebody. and like that knockoff boxing tournament that they had. I don't even remember the name of the fucking shit, but it was stupid as fuck. But he fought him there. I mean, Brian Vera is your journeyman between 160 and 168. And I think he's even fought at 175. You know what I'm saying? Basic journeyman. He was never a guy that anybody thought he was that anybody thought was going to be that good. Hell, I live in Texas. You know what I'm saying? At the time, I was living in Austin, and Brian Vera was not being talked about. You know what I'm saying? James Kirkland was that dude. I don't even remember hearing Brian Vera's name like that. He wasn't anybody that was on anybody else's radar, at least respected boxing enthusiasts. And actually, when that fight was announced and it was shown live on ESPN, everyone thought Andy Lee was just gonna run through the cat. And I remember Lamont Peterson's brother, Anthony Peterson, was a special guest commentator. And even he said, he's like, dude, you know, Andy Lee is making this fight harder than it really needs to be. I mean, Brian Vera is a one-dimensional fighter. You know what I'm saying? He's letting them bully him. He's letting them get on the inside. You know, Andy Lee's not displaying the type of pedigree that Emanuel Steward pretty much promised. I added that in there myself. But that's pretty much what they were getting at, right? The commentators and Anthony Peterson. And what ultimately happened was the high pressure of Brian Vera was too much for Andy Lee, and he ended up getting knocked the fuck out in the 7th round. Now, when I saw that, I was like, oh man, this dude is whack. You gotta see, this is the thing in boxing, you gotta beat those kind of guys. Now, of course, you know, people, they lose fights, you know what I'm saying, and they actually come back to become world champions, you know, Hall of Famers, you know what I'm saying. Losing a fight in boxing, you're supposed to. It's gonna happen. You know what I'm saying? But what you really assess, or at least let me say what you're supposed to assess to be able to conclude that a fighter's not gonna be an elite level fighter, is his skill set in the ring against a certain type of style, right? If you see a guy fighting a certain way against a one-dimensional fighter and he ultimately loses, right? Or let's say he's in the ring with the fighter and he's winning the fight, but then you see him fading. Then late in the fight, he ends up getting knocked out or loses the decision because he faded so many of the mid to late rounds. You get the idea that he's not a very smart fighter, right? That he doesn't have the IQ to make adjustments when needed. It's exactly what I thought of Andy Lee, right? And this was me when I wasn't really that, well, 2008, I was an intermediate breakdowner, right? I wasn't an expert yet. I was able to know when guys were not portraying, or at least manifesting an excellent IQ, right? I could say, hey, that guy has a flaw in that particular category, right? And that's what I saw in Andy Lee. Now, if you look at Andy Lee's career, he's really fought nobody, right? A lot of guys that he fought were pretty much D, C level fighters, right? He only beat one world champion. You know what I'm saying? And that was Carl Daniels in 2007. And at that time, Carl Daniels was like a 37-year-old man. You know what I'm saying? And the only reason why Carl Daniels was a former champion is because he won the WBA title way back in 1995 at 154 pounds. You know what I'm saying? But he only held the title for 6 months because he lost in his very next fight. That was the only time he was ever a champion. And, you know, basically, since he was a champion for 6 months, you have to give Andy Lee credit for beating one world champion. And when he did step up, you know what I'm saying, he lost. His biggest fight of his career was against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., right? An undefeated Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And actually, even though Chavez at the time was like 45-0, right? Andy Lee was still seen as a live dog just because of the hype that Emanuel Steward had around this kid, right? Man, it was a tough fight. It was a close fight. You know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. proved to have superior talent, have superior skill, and this isn't even saying much. This is Chavez Jr. You know what I'm saying? This is the same guy that smokes weed before fights and shit, right? And after. And I think he got caught smoking weed after the he failed a drug test after the Sergio Martinez fight, which was well after this fight. So ain't no telling, you know, if he was getting blunted and shit before the Andy Lee fight and any other fight, you know, after and before that, right? So this is a guy who never really took training seriously, and he still showed that he was the more superior fighter than Andy Lee, right? I think he knocked him out in the 7th round, if I'm not mistaken, right? So he just never really, he was never really a guy who could win the top level fights. The only time he did, and I'll say it was top level within the 160-pound division. It wasn't a top level fight in boxing. Like, for example, if you go to 3kingsboxing.com and you go to the homepage, I have a grid that says 5-star fights, and these are the best fights in boxing that are on the bill today, right? I would not have put Andy Lee versus Matt Korobov on that grid. I wouldn't have done it. That's a B-level fight in my opinion, right? But it was a high-level fight at 160 because at that time, there was nobody at 160, right? Daniel Jacobs was still kind of, you know, trying to recover from his stint with cancer. You've got Peter Quillen, who was one of the best fighters at 160 at that time, undefeated. But it was clear he was ducking the shit out of Gennady Golovkin. And if you guys don't believe me, I'll direct you to an interview. I think it was by IFL TV, a British media company. They interviewed him, and it was an outside interview. It was a long time ago. It had to be like 2012 or something like that, right? It was an outside interview, and they kept asking him about Golovkin, and he gave every fucking excuse under the sun why he wouldn't fight Golovkin. He even said, why would I fight him when we're both guys trying to make a name for ourselves? That was one of his excuses. We're both guys trying to eat. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to eat. He's trying to eat. Why would we mess up each other's eating? Get the fuck out of here. You know what I'm saying? That's what Peter Quillen, that was one of his excuses for not wanting to fight Gennady Golovkin. But anyway, you got him ducking. I mean, you had Hassan N'Djamena, who was an undefeated fighter at the time. He ended up losing to Peter Quillen his first fight, I believe. But, you know, he was fast, he was flashy, you know, but the knock on him was he still had a rocky chin. And when he fought Peter Quillen, I think he was knocked down like 6 times and shit in that fight, right? So we knew he had a questionable chin before. So the only guy really was Gennady Golovkin. You know, Billy Joe Sanders hadn't made a name for himself. You know, it was really just Gennady Golovkin. David Lemieux had already lost to fucking Joaquin Alcine and Marco Antonio Rubio, right? It was just Gennady Golovkin. So that's a high-level fight in that division because Matt Korobov was undefeated. He still had the amateur reputation of defeating Gennady Golovkin in the amateurs, right? Backing him going into this fight. So a lot of people were like, man, it's a tough fight for Andy Lee. And a lot of people had Matt Korobov winning. And then, of course, you know, Andy Lee, you know, he was who he was at that particular time. But he won that fight, you know, against all odds. We got to give him credit for that. But at the same time, like I said, it wasn't a high-level fight in the sport of boxing. So while he did get his belt, and we do have to give him credit for that, it still, in my opinion, wasn't a major 5-star win for Andy Lee. And that's something that eluded him his entire career. And I truly believe it was the fact that Emanuel Steward put a lot of hype around the kid, and he just couldn't live up to the hype. Maybe it was too much pressure for Andy Lee, right? Or maybe he was just literally another situation where he was an excellent amateur, but just couldn't transfer that in the pros. Like I said, man, it's just, like I said, it's just a guy that he really, in my opinion, was a solid B+ possibly B- level fighter. I think at 33, man, he should have stayed in the game. There was too much for him that he needed to do. But maybe he felt like he had already fulfilled his prophecy, right? And what was prophesized was, of course, through the eyes of Emanuel Steward, was that he will become world champion one day. And he achieved that. YouTube, do what you do in the comment section. Be real. Let me know what you think about the retirement of Andy Lee. And does it really even, does it have like a mark on boxing? Like, does it really make a difference at 160 pounds? I mean, or is anybody gonna be like, damn, I wish Andy Lee was still here because we could see this fight? You know what I'm saying? Let me know what you think. This is real talk for real fans. One.